Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sadie Jensen. I'm a health educator with Lancaster County Health Department. I want to welcome you all today to the roundtable discussion titled "Is Tobacco Use a Social Justice Issue in the LGBTQ Community?" which is brought to you by Tobacco Free Lancaster County and OutNebraska. Our goal today here is to discuss the prevalence of tobacco product use in the LGBTQ community, the associated health disparities impacting the LGBTQ community, and some possible ways that we can address this disparity in our community. So the format for today, I'm going to give each of our panelists a few minutes to introduce themselves, talk about their background and history with this subject, and then I'll kick off the conversation with some questions that were submitted during our registration process. If you'd like to submit any questions that you have, please do so throughout. You can use the chat box and we'll get to those as we go. And the panelists will fill us all in on with all of their knowledge. So we'll go ahead and start with our panelist introductions. We'll start with Scout. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Last time I was hanging out with you all with Nebraska Tobacco Control, I was out there, which was kind of more fun than being on Zoom, but that's okay. We'll take it. So I'm Scout, the executive director of the National LGBT Cancer Network, and we run CDC's Tobacco and Cancer Disparity Network, the one for queers. And I've been doing this for probably about a dozen years. So it means that I spend a lot of my time doing technical assistance around tobacco use, around cancer, and of course, you know, a third of all cancers would disappear if smoking disappeared. So the two of those are pretty closely twined with each other. And so I think that's kind of me. And we can talk about more later. How's that?
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome. Let's talk to Abby.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name's Abby. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of OutNebraska. OutNebraska is a statewide education and advocacy organization. We're working to celebrate and empower the LGBTQIA+ community across Nebraska. And we are really happy to be partnering with Tobacco Free Lancaster County. We are headquartered in Lincoln, but do travel all over the place, and we'll be traveling for Pride this month. I am a former smoker, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. I've been a part of OutNebraska for about 11 years, which is almost the entire time the organization has been around. So I'm really happy to be here today and to be talking to you. Thanks.
Hey, Abby, do you have string art behind you? Is that what I'm seeing there?
I have antique doilies behind me.
Oh, cool.
Yes, there's one that's shaped like a chicken right there.
Oh, yes.
And there's like a little dress and a basket. And yeah, those are collected from different stores and antique shops. And then they're just all up on a big piece of fabric. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Love that. That's amazing. Thank you. Welcome, Abby. And then Sophia.
Can't be antique doilies, but I'm happy to be here. And I'm here representing Tobacco Free Lancaster County. I am a tobacco health educator for the Lancaster County Health Department. I primarily work with businesses and health providers to help with the tobacco cessation conversation, as well as implementing tobacco-free campuses as a supportive environment for those that are trying to quit tobacco or have quit tobacco, and then just keeping the air healthy for everybody's lungs. I'm here as an ally and just to kind of provide some local resources that are in information from Lancaster County and Nebraska. So thank you. I'm excited for this conversation. It's really important.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So our first question that we had was, why is tobacco product use more prevalent in the LGBT community?
Pick me. We don't know.
Scout, you're first.
we did. Yeah. Sorry. I know it's kind of odd when this is a podcast as well. Also, I should say my pronouns are he, him for the people who can't see them already on my Zoom. I would say the fast answer to this is we don't really know, because there isn't enough research on some of the different issues that cause us to start. So, from a scientific level, if I put my scientist hat on, I'd have to say we don't know enough, because there's such a problem with lack of research in our populations. But What are the little glimmers of light we have on the horizon that talk to us about what the picture is here? Well, just as an example, the average age that LGBTQ people start smoking is 13. The average age we come out is, according to HRC's most recent youth survey, 13. We do know that things like tobacco use and other maladaptive health behaviors are used as coping skills when you're under stress. We also know that we have been targeted by the tobacco industry and that they have particularly done actually a fair amount to try and help us show that there are real big friends in a hostile world. And that targeting probably has resulted in more uptake. We know we have a fair amount of gratitude actually to the tobacco industry. There was a while ago, there were some focus groups done by, of course, all groups overlap, but mostly queers and mostly African Americans. It was interesting when shown targeting, the African American population was upset. The queers in the focus group were grateful. So there's this interesting phenomena that we've been so excluded for so long that if someone kind of reaches out their hand and says, hey, I'll be your friend, we appreciate that. And even if unfortunately they happen to sell something that causes death when used as directed, So you put some of those factors together: social exclusion, social isolation, targeting. The biggest picture is, if you really want an umbrella word as to why we smoke more or use tobacco more, the answer is discrimination. It really is just discrimination.
And I know we were going to get into a little bit more of your personal story, Abby, at a later time, but maybe you could give a little perspective on this, on what the reasons were surrounding when you started using tobacco products.
I would say that stress coping was a big part of my uptake on tobacco products. I had not come out yet, but I was under a lot of stress because I hadn't come out, because I recognized the difference in myself and lived in a very small town that was also a very fundamental town, religiously fundamental town. And at the time it was, it was the 80s. It was the height of the AIDS crisis. And I thought I was going to die because I was queer. So, like picking up tobacco didn't seem like such a bad idea. And I think that core discrimination issue is really huge. And even though we've made great strides, I think it's still a huge issue. And so that research, that focus group Research Scout, just fascinates me, that the community appreciates being targeted because that exclusion is so big for so long. That just, wow, that's really interesting. But I could see that. I really can. Makes sense.
We've also got, evidence showing from way back in the 90s that the tobacco industry was kind of asking our community leaders, what are the messages that resonate with this population? And they'd be like, well, things like hands off our bodies resonate. Like, don't legislate what we're going to do. Like, don't have a smoking law. Let us do whatever we want. Freedom to live. And this is actually, I'm quoting a tobacco industry ad now. Freedom to live, to love, to be, to marry, to inhale. It's all good. And so you see, except for like that last line, that's exactly what we've been fighting for civil rights for. But then they put the little twist that's like, and now we're on your side. So there's just like such, when you're an outsider population, there's such an insidious opportunity for people to become your friends. I mean, we know also from back in the 90s, Philip Morris gave our communities, I think it was like $60 million, I believe the number was, or something like that. And then they spent $100 million to brag about how much they were doing for our communities. So like every good opportunity is really a marketing opportunity. And to this day, I don't know if people notice, but all of the tobacco companies, as soon as they get that perfect score on the corporate equality index that HRC puts out, will be like, look how amazing we are. We're the perfect place to work. We're your friends. So it's just so many layers of kind of how you can build that gratitude.
Yeah.
And you guys keep mentioning the 90s and the tobacco marketing. And I know when I stepped into this tobacco prevention educator role a couple of years ago, I was sort of mind blown by the marketing plan Project Scum. I'm sure you're aware of it. And just having that name, which it was an acronym for Project Subculture Urban Marketing, which targeted the LGBTQ 90s specifically, and just the audacity to title it Project Scum just infuriates me. And it's like, oh my, and now we're grateful for it. So
right. And if I'm correct, it wasn't too far off from that. The exact same tobacco company was the one that ran that little ad saying, whenever anybody says that's so gay, we'll be there. It was, again, quoting another tobacco industry ad. And you're kind of like, no, I don't think Lucky Strikes is going to be there whenever anybody, queer bashes me in the first place. But second of all, what you say publicly about us versus what you're putting behind the scenes about us is such a wild difference. It's just, and of course, another reason why we also quote the 90s more is because we got a release of a lot of tobacco industry documents that cover the 90s. We don't have as much information about the tobacco industry today. And we know that they've gone kind of, a little below the radar screen. Like sometimes you find, I remember I was trying to do some cessation work with bars in Chicago. Several of them got back to me and said, sorry, we can't do any cessation work in the bars. And I'm like, why not? Like, you don't smoke, you think that we should try and get rid of this disparity. And they're like, oh no, we've signed agreements with the tobacco industry that will never allow cessation work in our bars. I'm like, what?
wow.
So there's all this kind of, a little bit below the surface stuff that's happening now. In the same way, we think, and Sophia, I'm sure, you're really familiar with this. We don't see as many tobacco ads if you're not a smoker anymore, right? I grew up with the 60-foot, Joe Camel cartoon ad on the side of a building in Chicago every day when I drove in. We don't see that anymore. But a lot of the way advertising has moved now is either in convenience stores, point of purchase, but more importantly, they send you stuff directly, which means a lot of the advertising isn't seen unless you're on their lists. And so, we've seen all these stories of, if you want to know where every LGBTQ bar in the country is, ask the tobacco industry, because they've probably deployed their people to go there, give a little free giveaway, and make sure that you get those smokers' names to put them on your list so that you can then send them custom tailored marketing from then on out. So a lot of it may not be as visible if you're not a smoker anymore, but it is still really happening.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks for pointing
Interesting.
that out.
And even more targeted as well. If you think about it that way, they're specifically going to those places and finding that demographic and then tailoring advertising and sponsorship money to them. So it makes them feel even more special, even more like they're paying attention to me. Interesting.
Sometimes it's completely in violation of local laws. Like they'll be like, we'll give you free cigarettes, which is illegal. So there's just all these, there was actually a video called How They Get Us to Screw Ourselves, which talked about the tobacco industry going to a big gala event because, GLAAD is our local is our local media advocacy, national. It's the National LGBTQ plus media advocacy organization that pushes back if the media is being negative with us or, discriminatory. And the interesting thing actually about How They Get Us to Screw Ourselves is that happened to show the tobacco industry sponsoring a GLAAD black tie and having a smoking lounge in violation of local law and having these like leotard bedecked models with Keith Haring symbols all over them, to make sure you got all your queer cultural indicators, dialed in, that would entice people to the smoking lounge where they were getting free cigarettes, also illegal, smoking doors, illegal. But the other part about that, which a lot of people don't know, is at that same time that was happening, the head of Truth Initiative, who is an ally and has always been investing in LGBTQ tobacco disparity stuff, came to me at one of the tobacco events and said, Scout, we've made our first ad for the Truth Initiative, which actually highlighted Project Scum. And that was back when we mostly had the three big networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, right? We pitched it to those three networks and 2 out of the 3 said, no, we wouldn't carry it because it's queer. So Abby, what do we do whenever some, a media outlet says we're not going to do something because it's queer? We immediately call up GLAAD. But GLAAD was neutralized. They basically had kind of duct tape over their mouths because the tobacco industry was sponsoring their black ties around the country.
Mm.
I mean, not any longer. Luckily, that got fixed. So nothing against GLAAD, it shows you again. I'm sure at that point, GLAAD was like, oh, great, we've got a major sponsor coming in for our black tie. But you just don't realize how there's all sorts of interesting sequelae from things like that.
Mm-hmm. It's insidious that the tendrils of how that sponsorship and donor relationships work, and that's really a space that LGBTQ plus organizations need to be aware of sponsorships and donations, and where does that fall in the values of your organization, and really being clear on what's really important.
And Abby, you run a statewide organization that I'm sure doesn't have a massive endowment, right? So one of the big issues here is oftentimes your organization is, to be honest, hungry and struggling to keep its doors open. So, we had a lot of media outlets as there were these little fights to try and say, don't take tobacco industry money, don't take the ads. We had a fair number of media outlets saying we'd close. We'd close if we didn't take their ads. And I know that a lot of organizations were probably in similar situations. So if someone comes and offers you, big dollar sponsorship, it's just a hard position when you can often be so hand to mouth to say no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you still see that in, I know we're in the month of Pride events. Do we still see that in sponsorship for Pride events as well? Is that still something that's difficult?
Well, we're a little bit on a cusp right now where there is more of a movement around the country for prides to go tobacco free. California has had great success with it. I actually was out in Nebraska trying to see if we could get one of your biggest pride, probably Omaha, to go smoke free probably a decade ago or something. And I don't know, Abby, do we know, did it succeed at all? Is it smoke free?
It's in a venue that I believe smoking is not allowed inside the venue. So in that sense it is, but I don't know if people just go outside of the venue.
Right.
So I don't know if the entire campus of the event is tobacco free, but the venue that it's held in is. So that's
a starting point.
It's a starting point.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, so it's a little bit more kind of the fight is kind of to make a lot of the pride smoke free, but you still see things happening like kind of, I guess a state and a half over from you in Missouri. They decided that it was an outdoor pride. They did not have smoking at the pride at a park, but you know how Missouri in pride season can be hot as Hades. So what the tobacco industry came in and offered was, how about if we provide a whole bunch of air-conditioned, those like construction trailers.
Yeah.
So how about if we basically provide a whole bunch of air conditioning for your very hot pride? Only caveat is that'll be the smoking area. So, there's just so many, little ways that they can, and they've got so much money that honestly, for them, a rounding error in their accounting to us is like a glorious, massive jackpot of gold. So that's always a challenge too.
Interesting. Okay. I think in the next portion, we'll talk a little bit more about what the impact of that prevalence of tobacco use in the LGBTQ community does. So what health impacts are there, physical, mental, psychological, social impacts that has on the community? Do you want to speak?
Am I just dominating this?
No, you're doing great.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got to admit, it's interesting because the way you asked that, I'm going to give an answer I've never given before, anytime when asked this. Just because the way you asked that, it made me realize, I think the thing that pisses me off the most about the health impacts is not actually that, 50% of people die early from tobacco use if you use it. It's actually that almost every single smoker wants to quit and spends their life trying to quit. And really, it's like we'll give people methadone for their whole life to get off heroin. But for smoking, the truth is partially because the tobacco industry has so well funded our legislators that there hasn't been a lot of investment. We don't have good tools to help you quit. So you basically have an addiction that's the strongest one I know of that people can get near. Like I have a researcher friend who used to be a heroin addict and now researches addiction, a PhD researcher, and she's still trying to get off smoking, even after she's had several major adverse health events. So she could kick heroin long ago, but smoking decades later, she is still struggling to get away from. So it's just such an insidious, big, written large addiction, and we don't have great tools around it. So I think the thing that really pisses me off the most, and this is my new answer, is that our community members who already have so many struggles, feeling accepted, feeling proud, feeling loved, feeling strong, feeling able to walk another day through this world that is not always welcoming, spend so many years of their life being upset at themselves that they can't get out from something they're trying to get out from under. I feel like that demoralization is probably what I'm maybe the most upset about. There are lots more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I absolutely love that answer because really, and I think it's just natural to get down on yourself when you can't quit something that you want to quit, have it be anything. But yes, with that strong addiction that nicotine offers, that even when you do make a small success, it's hard to celebrate that. And what we know is that you have to celebrate those small successes to get big successes. And instead, we have this sort of norm in our culture to, oh, I gave in, I'm just going to not even try to quit again for maybe a really long time, maybe ever. And so, yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head on that being kind of an unseen health effect or not highlighted health effect for sure.
Yeah. And, for the people watching or listening, if you're a smoker, power to you, because I know 97% of smokers are actually trying to quit, so, or 93 or something, some huge number like that. So, you're trying to get out from something that obviously, Abby, you have firsthand experience with, and it will usually take on average 7 to 8 times. So, one of the things we do want to get the message out there about is like every single day when you smoke a little less, or every single time when you go a day without smoking, you are one step closer to being out from under this forever. So those are successes. Like you say, Sophia, we really have to say, that is a huge step forward. You may have wanted to go all the way across the finish line in your first try. Most people don't. So be gentle with yourself and understand. And it is a good reason, like I know you have 1-800-QUIT-NOW, a quit line out in Nebraska. It is a reason to try and marshal as many resources as you can to kind of aim it at this, because trust me, it's deep. I remember reading once that the only thing we do semi-conscious, if you're a smoker, more than smoke, think of it, you don't eat more, is blink. That's the only semi-conscious thing we do more than smoking. So imagine just how deep the habit is, not even counting, there's an addiction on top of the habit. Yeah.
That is so true. So yeah, that unintended, unspoken, like, I can't get away from this feeling that you have when you're trying to quit. And you're right, we already struggle with so many other things. To have that as another struggle is just, it's heartbreaking. And I do know it took me years to quit. As I mentioned, I started in high school, and I think I was in my 30s before like I really quit for the long term, and have been quit now for quite a while. So it is something that, and I was talking before we got started with Sophia a little bit about the monetary impact, right? When we have so many members of our community struggling with underemployment or unemployment, and so that like financial resources are really thin. When I think to myself, all those years I could have been spending money on clothes or shoes or college books or any of a number of other things that I could have used that money for. That's a big impact also, because it's just, that unemployment and underemployment of our community is huge, but people will give up prescription medications or other things they need to keep purchasing cigarettes because it is such an insidious habit and it is so difficult to get away from. And we do have that struggle. That really, I think, is something that pisses me off about it.
We've run an analysis, a financial model of how much we spend based upon our average smoking rates and our, how many of us smoke on cigarettes every year. And it's in the billions of dollars. And the interesting thing is it's so much more than all of the organizations funding queer rights issues put together. So that means we're supporting the tobacco industry much more than every single funder is supporting queer rights by an order of multitude, by an order of magnitude that much bigger. So yeah, Abby, as you say, you add that up one person at a time and suddenly, of course, you know why they love us. We're really helping their business.
Yeah.
When we talk a little bit about cost and we talk about personal costs, there's also the healthcare costs. And the being underinsured or uninsured as well. And so you have the health impact of using tobacco products and using those products that cause health effects and then not being able to afford the right care or have access to or the tools and resources to get the right care. Do you have any other information or comments about that?
Okay, I will. I'm happy to. Well, what I was going to say was, I just didn't know if you wanted to talk, and that's why you don't mute yourself. What I was going to say is that one of the things that we don't realize is that, first of all, we have a tendency to think that smoking is related to lung cancer, right? And one of the things I don't think we realize is it's actually a major health depressant that affects so many parts of your body. Okay, I'll just give a side story. I was in New York City once listening to a gender confirmation surgeon from Belgium that was doing state-of-the-art surgeries around the world for trans guys, and told the amazing story of someone who had a phalloplasty, gender confirmation surgery, put together phalloplasty, and it didn't take because the person was a smoker. In other words, I just wish we could just pass the news that your might fall off if you're a smoker, and maybe that would motivate more people. I don't know, maybe more successful. But it's just such an incredible general health depressant that it affects so much of your health. There's a nasty synergistic effect with HIV. Like right now, if your HIV is managed, you're more likely to die from smoking than you are from HIV by, again, several times over. It seems like each year more and more of these chronic diseases, all the way down to diabetes, things like that, are all suddenly now correlated with smoking and have higher levels of impact if you smoke. So in some ways, this whole idea that it causes lung cancer is kind of the 1950s analysis of smoking. What we know now is that it messes up kind of everything. It certainly messes up surgeries. It messes up, your chance for your body to have a fighting opportunity to stay healthy in this world with all the different kinds of things that are coming at us. So, there've been analyses done on this about how much smokers lose more work, about how much smokers, I think anybody who's been in those interesting situations where you shop for private health insurance and they say, are you a smoker? Yes. What's the cost? Versus, are you a smoker? No. What's the cost? Right? Exactly. Ab is doing the huge difference, the health insurance companies know it. But I would say that the challenging thing is everybody knows the health effects are bad. We know it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it gives our own communities better tools to get to a different position. Again, most everybody wants to quit. And most everybody knows the health effects are really horrible. It just doesn't necessarily mean that helps you figure out how to step forward and get out from under it.
Right. And I kind of want to add to that, since we're talking a lot about smoking and the health effects, but also relating it to the vaping and health effects, because a lot of people are turning to vaping as a means to quit combustible smoking or combustible cigarettes. And the research, we don't have the research to say, yes, this is exactly the long-term effects of vaping, but we also know it probably isn't good for you. Because guess what? You're inhaling these things that are meant to be ingested, like propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, and they're meant for your digestive tract, not your respiratory tract. So that's just another one that I really want to highlight, because especially with our youth, like that's what they are turning to as their initial, like, hey, I never would have smoked cigarettes in a million years. Like we had that beat, and now we have vaping. So I don't want to gloss over that during this conversation at all, because there's definitely the health risk there as well.
I agree. I think vaping it's the big story related to tobacco use right now. You know, when we looked at queer disparities, at one point we smoked at rates that were 60% higher than the general population. And since then, the disparity has been kind of getting smaller and smaller every passing year. Guess what? Now it's turned the other direction and it's heading back up, all because now we don't just measure cigarette use, we measure all tobacco use. So vaping is turning it the other direction. We know that depending on what year you look at, between a quarter to a third of our youth are getting addicted to tobacco via vaping. And that's a huge number that I think a lot of people don't realize. Because again, if you're not the target demographic, you're kind of like, what's vaping? You know, but it's such a charismatic mix of technology, cool shops like a Starbucks-y shop kind of thing, flavors like Captain Crunch, Cherry Starburst. Of course, you know, as a middle-aged guy, I'm kind of like, I don't think you're aiming for me, because I'm not going to pick up anything that says Captain Crunch on it. You know what I mean? I'm not 12, but maybe you are aiming for the 12-year-olds, right? So it happens to be those 12-year-olds who are starting. And of course, you know, you listen to the tobacco industry and they'll say, this is all about helping those adult smokers quit. Adult smokers who are actually finally able to get cessation usually are those middle-aged people. So again, are you drawing them with the Captain Crunch flavor, or are you aiming somewhere else? So this whole idea that the tobacco industry wants us to think that vaping has to do with cessation, but secretly a huge number of our youth are getting addicted to something that, again, is so hard to stop. And then, you know, Sophia, you're absolutely right. We don't have enough data on it. But then we see little data points like, your chance of getting COVID is much higher if you vape. And you're kind of like, oh yeah, once we get enough research, I think we're going to realize, yes, of course, it's better than combustible cigarettes. But that's like saying that, you know, if we could give heroin in a pill, it'd be safer than heroin in it with a needle. You know, you're kind of like, I still don't want my kids on heroin. The end.
I agree. And I think that when we talk back to that fact that you brought up, that the kids are starting at age 13, that's really when they're starting. And so then you have the advertising with the flavorings in these brightly colored advertisements and social media, them doing tricks with the vape clouds and that kind of thing is something that gets brought up a lot with our youth, and saying that those are things that they're seeing on social media. It's something that we need to really be mindful of in reducing that advertising, reducing how they're seeing that, how they're getting a hold of those products as well. So let's talk a little bit more about.
I just want to say, have you also
cessation.
seen some of those vaping, some of those, you know, the flavors, just all the different flavors that are made to mimic cigarettes? I know we're not really presenting anything here, but I have like behind me a picture of all these different tobacco products that are made to look so much, I'm sorry, not to mimic cigarettes, to mimic candy, that looks so much like kids' candy, but they just happen to be tobacco products instead. So, yeah, I mean, you can tell they're built off the exact same model. Once again, that kind of, you know, when you've got a company that wants to make money and there's lots of money to figure out how to do it, all sorts of interesting and devious strategies emerge.
Absolutely. So if we talk a little bit more about those, the tools and the things that are missing in cessation, how do we impact the access to that? How do we gain those tools and those resources? How do we put that information out there for people who want to have those resources?
You know, one of my big questions on that, and this might be a question maybe for Abby, is like, we know from some research that even queers who want to quit smoking are 5 times less likely to call the state quit line than other populations. And, you know, it's funny because the researchers were like, we're not sure why this is. And I'm thinking, oh, I know why. Because we have a huge history of access to care problems. And especially when it has to do with the state, then we have a history of, we don't want you to have civil rights problems added on to access to care problems, right? So you put the two together, and no, we don't trust that we're going to be welcome. And so I guess I want to ask, in Nebraska, and maybe Abby, is there work being done to try and help, I guess, educate the population about how we've been targeted, but maybe get us a little bit more comfortable with maybe using some of the cessation resources that do exist?
I think that's work we're starting to try to do through our partnership. But I think there's still a really long way to go in that. And you are so right that there is a distrust of state resources, especially when we think about our current leaders at the state level, very anti-gay, anti-queer. And so there's not the trust that those state resources are going to be helpful. But I think we've just got to keep trying to educate about the resources and to say, these are neutral folks. Their job is not to judge. Their job is really to be a resource to you as you are trying to overcome this addiction. And that's really what the focus is about. But it can be so hard for folks to get through, get past that barrier, that perceived barrier.
Yeah, why would we think we're welcome? And who is your Quitline vendor? Do you have your own in Nebraska, or do you use one of the big ones?
We use National Jewish Health Network.
Oh, so like the head of their Quitline is a gay guy, and he's done a whole lot to try and make sure that, I actually went out there and trained them several times in the beginning, and then they kept that training up, and then, he's done a lot to make sure they're welcoming. So yeah, it's this whole big mix between, they may be very welcoming, but we don't trust it. So how do you get the two of those things together?
Right.
I didn't even realize the head of that particular service was a gay man. And that's knowing that is huge, right? That is something we can use. That's information that we can say, did you know? Did you know that people on the Quitline have received training? Just knowing that, I think, can go a long way in conversations with people as we're discussing resources.
They actually went so above and beyond when we were looking at how to test some of the ways to ask LGBT so it was more welcoming. They're like, our current measure is kind of clunky. Well, how about, why don't you use us as a field test to test a better measure? And so they offered for free that, we were able to field test a better measure, and we had 30,000 cases, which in the survey world is huge. You don't, how do you get 30,000 cases for free? But the Quitline National Jewish just offered it because they really wanted to make sure they had, as solid as services for this population as could be. And that was before Thomas came on. He's the head. So
that's great.
Something we're also going to be doing in probably the next 4 months is launching a national portal for people, just a web landing page that has some information around our targeting, has some information around, stories from how it's affected different elements of our population, and then has some of the best strategies, and then try and encourages people towards their own quit line. So it doesn't tell people how to quit, because as Sophia and Sadie know really well, quit lines they have to keep the state-of-the-art best quit standards. That's how they are competitive. So all you have to do is call 1-800-QUIT-NOW, and you'll be connected with someone who's been taught the latest of the latest of how cessation is most successful. So the website doesn't say anything about the how. It more just says, we've been targeted. These quit lines really have gotten training. They should be welcoming. If they're not, contact us and we will shake them until they become welcoming. Exactly. What's your problem? And please, because it's not a personal thing, it's a community thing here that's happened. If you're a smoker, it's not only your own journey, and it's certainly not guilt you should be internalizing. This is a community targeting phenomenon.
And I know we had Out Nebraska partnered with the Bay here last night for a youth event, which was amazing and very successful. And I know we talked to a lot of youth that took our information that had text line information on it as well. Have you seen other social media or other types of quit line and cessation things that work for youth, because that is a group that is being targeted.
Do you think that texting is like a big thing for youth? So as much as we kind of call them quit lines, no one's really using a phone anymore. It's like that whole Montero thing. Call me by my, or, call me, and you're kind of like, don't call me, just text me, please. Don't call me, please. No. So yeah, the tech stuff is really great with youth, but I will say that it's an area where we could use a lot more work. I think youth cessation of combustible cigarettes, we still don't have enough science. Youth cessation of e-cigarettes, even less science. And it again just kind of shows you that we should have lots of tools. And unfortunately, probably because that industry is, sponsored so many legislators, we don't have as many tools as we should. One of the things to remember, though, of course, if you are, I think it's helpful to, pull back the curtain behind how the arc goes, because, you talk to a lot of youth and they're like, no, I'm not a smoker. I just occasionally smoke. And that's just the smoker. You're the smoker of tomorrow, or the e-cigarette user of tomorrow, because that's how everybody starts. That's the arc that everybody's on. So if you're an occasional smoker, unless you're using e-cigarettes less than you were last week, every week, then you're just sliding right into home base with the tobacco industry, and they're, gleefully rubbing their hands, being like, aha, we got you. So, the occasional and intermittent smoking it's not a static place like a lot of people think. That's just, you're sliding into home base, slower or faster, but that's where you're going.
Yeah.
And when we talk about other barriers and ways to help the LGBTQ community to with cessation or with prevention, is there other things that we should be looking at in terms of legislation, policies? Are there other things that we can do as a community as a whole to make things better and remove some of those barriers?
So that's a great question. And where do you all stand? Sophia or Sadie, do you know, where do you stand with flavor bans?
Right now it's not a priority bill, I guess. It hasn't really been brought up even locally. So
really,
yeah.
So there's two areas related to legislation that are making it harder for the tobacco industry to do its work. One is this kind of complicated thing called preemption. But actually, the reason why preemption is also sometimes really important to queers is what preemption means is the state passes a law that the localities cannot then go against. So the state might say, you can smoke inside everywhere. And that means the locality, Omaha would say like, no, we don't want to smoke inside because that's bad. But then Omaha can't go against the state. So that's preemption. But the reason why it relates to queers a lot too, and Abby, I don't know if this has come up there, is that the state will say you can't pass a queer civil rights law too. So it's interesting how preemption has been used with queers as well as with smoking. And in each case, basically, preemption's a bad thing. We want, the more either forward thinking or health oriented or queer focused areas to be able to pass protections that may not exist in other parts. And then presumably once there's enough of those, eventually the whole state would also follow. So there's preemption, and then the second way is these banning flavors in cigarettes. Now this is in e-cigarettes. This is not banning e-cigarettes, and none of the laws around this ever punish the user. So in other words, there's a lot of issues of like we don't want police to be attracted to Black people and have any chance of saying you're doing something criminal that's new, right? We definitely don't want that. That hasn't worked well in the past. We don't want to perpetuate it in any way whatsoever. So, but it is only for the vendors, the people who are selling the stuff. It basically penalizes the vendors if they're doing any flavors. So you can sell cigarettes, but you can't sell menthol, which is the flavor that most of the African Americans are using and queers are using at higher rates too. And all menthol is mint. It's just a fancy word for mint flavor. You can sell e-cigarettes, but you can't sell Captain Crunch e-cigarettes. So, again, that leaves e-cigarettes as a great use for those middle-aged folks trying to get off of cigarettes, but it stops the 12-year-olds from starting on them. So it's really powerful. And I'm sorry, I guess, to hear that it's not getting more traction in Nebraska.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that we need to prioritize. I know that we were excited that last year we did add vapor products to our Clean Indoor Air Act. So you can't vape indoors anymore, which is statewide and celebrated. But yeah, we definitely need to move toward that. Another one that Nebraska is kind of lagging behind on is the tobacco tax in general. We're really low on the list there. So politically, those are a couple things that, yeah, we really need to
So
start.
you're making the tobacco, it's cheaper for the tobacco industry to sell all their stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. It's 60 some cents a package is all. We're way below the national average.
Wow.
We did have
That is-
legislation this year that did not get through that wanted to increase it. I think it was $1.50, but it didn't make it through. So it's not that they're not trying. It's that it's not happening quite yet. So
hazard a guess. Just curious, does anybody have any idea how much of your legislature takes tobacco industry funding?
That'd be really great information to have. And I don't know that we do have it. And we need an intern or someone to comb through election campaign or campaign donations.
Yeah. You know, in California, they did this kind of interesting thing where it was the queers who let us sign on to a don't take tobacco industry funding thing. And they would do it with a lot of people before they were elected, which was good. So you weren't necessarily taking it yet. And they would just kind of overlap. Look, if you're interested in queer civil rights or supporting LGBTQ plus issues, then, don't be part of this. Because, like in the big picture, I think one of the things that we don't realize is, if you ask us what our health problems are, what do we say? Like HIV, mental health, suicidality, things like that. Well, just as an example, there's about an estimated 600,000 people in the country who are queer who have HIV right now. And in comparison, if there's 14.5 million queers altogether, a little under a third of us smoke or something like that, that means there's probably like 3 million of us range that probably smoke. Half of those people are going to die early from it at least. So like you can see now, the impact of smoking is much larger on our population than the impact of something as high profile as HIV. And, I can't just help but think that there's a bunch of industry executives really happy that we don't understand how this plays in our, like the ecosystem of all of our health impacts.
absolutely. Well, we have about 8 or so minutes left. So if there's any folks that have questions, feel free to put those in the chat so we make sure that we get those answered before the end. Otherwise, I will go around and just give you all each a few minutes if you want to just anything that you want to say about tobacco policies, about things that we should be aware of, things that we should be working on and prioritizing. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And we can start with Abby.
Sure. I just really want to highlight community as a way of cessation, not necessarily like the quit lines obviously have the most advanced science around cessation, but I know that having community connections can be really important because part of what tobacco addiction is trying to do, especially now that we can't smoke indoors, there's a lot of, so people are having to leave social situations to go and smoke, right? And so what we want to do is build spaces where the community is in the forefront and like people want to stay together and are not going outside of the space to smoke, so that they're feeling those connections with each other and that we're supporting each other in our journeys, right? Because guilt never did anybody any good. And that is not the way to be supportive of people trying to get to cessation and get to a spot where they're out from underneath the addiction. To be supportive, I know can be really important. And so I hope that's the kind of community that we're building in our activities and the things that we do in the spaces that we build. And so just to say, we were really pleased with the turnout at the youth event that we helped to host last night. And that was an amazing evening. Started with a panel that really talked about growing up queer in the Midwest and why people are still in our area, and just offered some really wise things to the youth that were there. And then I learned for the first time what a silent disco is. I had never heard of silent disco, and that was a blast. There were 3 DJs, so 3 channels on the headphones, and it just really looked like people were having a lot of fun. But that, building that kind of community early for young queer folks is so heartening to me, because I know some of my first experiences with the queer community were in bars where smoking was very prevalent. It was prior to policies about indoor smoking. So, of course, even if I hadn't smoked, I would have been exposed to all the secondhand smoke in the space. And really, that role modeling of smoking behavior was a thing. And so building spaces where that's not the norm, where we're building tobacco and vape free spaces, where folks can have a good time and connect with each other and build friendships, I think just that is so important. So yeah, I feel like I kind of rambled there for a minute, but community can be so important. That was what I just wanted to add.
I like your rambling, Abby. But I'll just kind of piggyback on that with the community of support and just say my take home point is really to celebrate those small victories as you're attempting to quit tobacco. And I guess for those who aren't using tobacco products or vaping or anything, I mean, I have a 14-year-old, so celebrating not doing that on a regular basis is also something that's really important. And then also just to highlight the support of how to be successful in quitting if you are using tobacco products, because really only 4% of people can quit cold turkey successfully. So don't do that, or don't feel like that's your only option. Using a nicotine replacement therapy or another medication assistance for that addiction side of it is really helpful. So talk to your doctor. Call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Until the end of June, they are giving away 4 weeks of free nicotine replacement therapy. So if you're thinking about it, just make the call, please. And let's see. Talk to your doctor, quit line. Otherwise, you could text the This Is Quitting from, the Truth Initiative. That's for 13 to 24-year-olds. So that's Quit Vape to 88709. Otherwise, just, find people who will support you in positive choices. And we're here for you. We love you.
Love both of those answers. And Abby, I think you really do hit the nail on the head that we need to create not just more places where people are smoking vape free that are the norm, but also more places where we get that support, we get that welcome, where we don't feel like we're outsiders, we don't feel like we're alone. That'll really help us to not at such an early age, fall prey to the tobacco industry, basically. If you are someone who has already quit smoking, you're my hero, because you've done something really amazing and you should be really proud of that. And, Sophia had great strategies. If you're someone who is still trying to get out from under it now, be gentle on yourself. You know what I mean? This is a huge industry that has seeded all this kind of like frustration and shame inside of you. And I wish I wish that we could help you get free of that faster. You will be smoke free or vape free. That seems to be very certain on a course of the people who are trying to quit. They eventually get there. So you will get there too. And kind of as far as what to think about, if you're a community member, think about how you're supporting people through this journey. Because, I was going to say take them to movies. Movies don't necessarily exist. So take them to the youth night. Take them to anything that is something where they can't necessarily be smoking or vaping, but they're still really entertained and feel the love. Educate yourself on how to be a good ally and how to be a good supporter, because we're not going to get out from under this as a set of communities if we only think the smokers are the ones to change, right? We all have to change. And then from a policy perspective, I think the thing that I am most unnerved by is the percent of our youth getting addicted via these e-cigarettes. Like a quarter to a third of our youth we're going back to like 1980s rates or even further of smoking with these e-cigarettes. So be afraid, you know what I mean? And we do know again that like just banning the flavors makes it a huge difference. So if there's any way to kind of, you know, write your legislator or just talk to people, educate them about how these flavors lead to this level of addiction. And queer youth are just unfortunately doing it at such high rates, which I think, Abby, just reflects again our instability. You know, the fact that we experience such discrimination, such social exclusion at such a tender young age. So, you know, we got to work on a lot of fronts in order to change a big health problem in our communities. But I think everything is going in the right direction. I just love to accelerate it all just to be a little bit faster.
Well, that's great. I don't see any questions in the chat, so that's a good note to end on with all of your advice and your information there. So I want to thank everybody that came today to listen, and for all of our panelists today for all of your amazing knowledge and information. And thank you to Tobacco Free Lancaster County and OutNebraska for hosting this event. Funding for this discussion was provided by the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services Tobacco Free Nebraska Program as a result of the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement. So again, I want to thank all of you for being here, and I appreciate all of you for your knowledge, all of our panelists. Thank you very much.